Try it again. Let's start over again. It's 5:30, January 28th, 2019, Committee of the Whole. Can I have approval of the agenda?
So move.
I'll second it.
Moved by Councillor Pence, seconded by Mayor McGilvery. All in favor? Contrary-minded? Motion carried. Approval of previous minutes. Is there any errors or omissions? Any corrections? Can I have a mover?
I'll move the minutes as written.
I'll second that.
Moved by Councillor Pence, seconded by Councillor Campbell. All in favor? Contrary-minded? Motion carried. Moving on to business arising from previous minutes, and there's correspondence from the town of Shelburne. I think we asked the Chief, Dwight Campbell, he was going, we sent a letter to him.
Councillors, I don't know if you have any questions on that. With our communications downstairs, I don't have any problem with our communications downstairs. I get letters like this quite a bit. People wanting us to take over, come in and take over, doing stuff like that.
Thank you, Chief. I agree with you. I think our communications is more efficient the way it is. I don't see an improvement by moving it up to Halifax or Truro or somewhere down the valley. Anybody else that can speak on that?
Just to mention that it is also a revenue stream for us, and it's an important revenue stream for the police department. So I think outside the fact that it's more efficient the way it is, it's also more effective and efficient. So I think it's best to stay the course as we are now.
Is there anybody else that can speak on that? Do we need a motion on that? Okay, we'll accept it for information. We'll not go any further than that. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Number 5 is Active Transportation Plan, Paul Corbin and Rachel McLean.
Good evening. So we have a small presentation here that's just going to summarize, think of it as a very quick executive summary of the package that's in front of you. This is still a draft plan. There are some maps that have to be added in a later section, which we will be doing this week to send out to you as a final format before the council meeting in February. Just to begin, so active transportation. Active transportation is using our own power to get from one place to another, according to public health. Most people think of it as walking, cycling, biking, anything other than a motorized vehicle. So in last year, as part of the strategic plan, the town went to look at a bikeability and walkability and accessibility part of the strategic plan, and they asked the Department of Community Development and Recreation to look into that, and that is the active transportation plan. Just making sure that that's right. The view here is not. So the process was we went to the downtown core, and the initial thing was to talk to all the businesses to see what was concerns that they had, some suggestions that were out there, and we presented those ideas. We also did an online survey that went out to the public, the NSCC, and a closed one for the Sobeys head office, just so that we can get some data from the major employers, as well as we did an in-person consultation with the students at G.R. Saunders. We had tremendous amount of feedback. So there was also coincidentally, there was a public initiative to get the town to look at more safety measures around street crossings and things in the downtown core. That was signed over 400 times, and they presented that to us. So that added into the process of developing this plan. We also then looked at the existing infrastructure and then scored them to identify our strengths and weaknesses. So throughout all that data, we were able to compile the recommendation that is in front of you. But we went through with the lens of the bikeability, walkability, and accessibility. So with the bikeability, we looked at routes and improvements. So this is the primary route through Stellarton, everything that is in blue. And that's detailed by the access points, the destinations that you're going to, the suitability of the roads. So Stellarton actually has some tremendously wide roads that are very suitable for cycling. So we identified the routes, and then we identified which areas of those routes would purpose for bike lanes. And then as a secondary goal, to have rumble strips. Now, we looked into rumble strips. Some cyclists are really against them. They tried them in certain areas in the States, and then we realized that the ones that did work was they did them intermittently, where every 5 meters or so they would have them, and then take them away and then have them again. That way the cyclists can enter and exit the lanes without any difficulty, but motorists would instantly realize that they're starting to encroach in onto the bike lane. So it's that auditory response. And also shared streets. So some of our other streets that aren't wide enough, those would be shared streets. So instead of having a bike lane or share the road sign, it would be one stencil that would be down into the road, right in the lane, so that you'd be able to see it instantly. So when it comes to walkability, we're looking at creating safer crossings. The big thing came up out of these conversations were around the downtown core. Actually, there was 3 specific spots that we were looking at. So the first one that was identified was the post office crosswalk. The second one was right here at Jubilee. And the third was the A&W in front of Sobeys head office. So those 3 became safety goals to really look at and try to figure out a way to improve the safety so that people feel safer to cross there, which would encourage them to walk out and cross safely. So with that, we had some lights. Lit crosswalks was the number one thing that was being recommended, and we actually worked with the engineer to identify which ones would be the best suited for that area. So the one that you see on the screen there is a solar panel one that has an auditory response as well as the visual flashing lights. They are triggered on one side, but the lights flash on both. That would be ideal for the locations at the A&W and also the post office. That would create visual, it would make the area highly visible for people that were actually trying to cross, and then the auditory as well. The other thing that was came up through the survey was around a lot of people had the perception that people go very quickly down Ford Street. When we did the stealth radar, it proved that that isn't actually the case, but the perceived speed, as we all are aware, when you're driving down Ford, when you're going 30, it feels like you're going 60, and but that perceived speed is making some people feel wary of actually going out and crossing the streets. So maybe this is a good spot for Rachel to talk about the speed dampening measures that we were looking at.
Sure. So as Paul mentioned, one of the overwhelming response was the feeling when you're in the downtown core that there's a lack of safety when you're crossing the street, when you're in the street. If you're not in a car, then it doesn't feel safe. And along with that, we heard, well, there needs to be more enforcement. There needs to be more lighting. There needs to be a lot of different things. And we listened to all those things and incorporated where we could things like lighting and these crossings. But something that we can do to decrease the speed are more things that you're not even aware of. So it's environmental factors. So when you have a wide open space, typically cars travel faster. When you have a small space, cars travel slower because you feel like you don't have as much room. The other thing is that when you have a large distance between stoplights, you increase speed. So and especially towards a stoplight, typically you speed up to try to beat the light. If it's a stop sign, it's anticipated to stop and then make the decision from there. You assess the traffic and move forward. So we've recommended a midway stop at Jubilee, and that would be a 3-way stop sign or crossing. This would allow for traffic to slow down to the middle of the downtown and people to exit Jubilee reasonably, whereas now it takes a long time to make that approach, as well as the pedestrians crossing. That would improve safety there because you're looking for pedestrians. You're not edging your way out and taking a chance that they'll stop. So the other component to dampen the speed of vehicles, we have looked at increasing the environmental features. And those we've called parklets. So along the main street, on both sides, we are proposing or recommending that some of the parking spaces be recaptured as pedestrian space. So it's no more than the width of a parking stall, and that space would be turned into as you can see in some of these pictures, a space where there can be landscaping, there can be a bench, there could be cafe seating, there could be a number of different bike racks elements. Yep. So these are, they can be permanent or they can be seasonal. There can be a combination of.
And they do tie into, I know in a different committee we're talking about downtown revitalization. So there is a chance that those could also be used in a way to help rejuvenate the downtown core and create some sort of identity, or maybe even express our history a little bit through these opportunities.
It's also an interesting opportunity to partner with business as well. So in the report, we get into greater detail around the specifics and engineering that would be required for those features.
Okay, so with accessibility, so one of the big things that we're looking at with that is meeting or exceeding the accessibility standards. And we spoke with the engineer on this, and all new sidewalks and approaches and landings for intersections and crosswalks, all to meet or exceed this new standard. We've already begun doing that with a lot of our new sidewalks and landings. That's making sure that the angle of the the landing going down to the road is at a certain level so that it's easily accessible. There isn't any major lips. That could be tripping hazards or catches. There's ways to make them a little more visible, that there's a downslope there with, if I go back a little bit, you see how there's a color spot there? That's just to identify that that's where you're about to go out into the street. So there's lots of things to look at for that, and I know Councillor Lawand, you and I spoke before about the opportunity of creating the Albion Trail to be a true multi-use trail by paving even one section or the entire section for Stellarton. That would, right now, the crusher dust surface is a barrier to smaller wheeled travel. If it's a caster wheel wheelchair, if it's skateboards, if it's some strollers, things like that that aren't jogging strollers. This would create a true accessibility piece for one of our, well, actually it is our most used trail that travels from our downtown core all the way to the neighboring downtown. The next piece is around the education and promotion. So it is a major piece, and of course we do have that in there, that we go into this really looking at trying to change a culture. So we have, that our promotion would be on a regular basis to talk about the new routes and share the road laws. Also people's responsibilities, which is threefold. So it is the biker's responsibility, it's the pedestrian's responsibility, and it's the motorist's responsibility. So an education piece to be done with local daycares and elementary schools for a safe walking, safe biking. One of the great ideas that came out of one of our local daycares was around the working with the police for a walking license for small kids, learning how to appropriately walk on the streets, know where the crossings are, and how to use them safely. And then, of course, promoting all of the opportunities that a plan like this could bring, such as the parklets and a few other things that we have, and working with the businesses that were very supportive throughout this process. Is there any questions? Is a brief summary of a very in-depth plan. As you're noticing, Councillor Luan, for the big blue sections there are small maps that are to go with the descriptions that you're reading there, so that it'll be a little more clear. We had a bit of a file corruption today, so those images weren't there, but we do have them, and we'll make sure that they're on the final copy.
Thank you, Paul and Rachel. You did put a lot of work into it. It looks very nice. You're right in changing culture. It'll be a big, probably a battle there. I'm glad to see that you talked business. Some of the grief I get was on the police commission is trying to get stop signs to slow people down. As you know, people aren't really happy with stop signs. For some reason or other, they don't like stopping their vehicle when they get it going. But 4th Street's always been a concern of mine. I'm glad to see that you looked at it, because whenever I drive down there, I avoid going down Pleasant now, because it's too many deer there. So I go down 4th Street, but it's always a challenge, because when you're driving through there, there's always somebody jumping out in front of you, or doors are opening, or it's a real challenge. So thank you very much. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The plan looks very detailed, and at the first glance, because this is the first time I've seen it, it looks very well done. I would have loved to have seen it before that, so I will be here prepared with some questions. I do have one question that just sparked my interest when you were talking, and it's about the parklets. Now, from my perspective, the parklets are nice for the businesses, where it creates the ambiance, it creates some atmosphere, and some café trottoir is something that is known in multiple cities that is beautiful to see, kind of thing. But you're utilizing that into a different way here, saying that in efforts to slow and calm traffic. So I'm just wondering how that park is going to calm traffic and slow them down. I'm confused about that specific notion.
Sorry. Yes, this is the first time you're seeing it, but we wanted to present it first before you really get to dive into it before the council meeting in February. The parklets, as Rachel said earlier, create a visual confined space. Basically, it's imagining if you've seen Ford Street when it has parked cars the whole way down. What it does is it narrows that street down a little bit, so then you start to naturally travel at a slower speed. It's a behavioral thing that does happen. So you have more to look at. You're trying to look for dangers and things like that. So you're naturally traveling at a slower speed. Rachel, do you?
Sure. So yes, basically, essentially, you're using the space that we have because we can't. We have a confined space, so we are narrowing the view plane, and within those spaces, we'll be able to have plantings and to soften, because we don't have a lot of opportunity for trees and that sort of thing, and so that is essentially it. It is narrowing that view plane.
Thank you for the explanation, and I can appreciate that. I just have a little bit of reservation on that specific, even though I love it from a visual standpoint. But the Planning Advisory Committee has talked to the businesses around town, and one of their biggest complaint was about the parking spots. That's, I don't want to say non-existent, but is limited. So there will be some resistance on that aspect for sure. But I love them myself. Thank you. The other question that I have is, so in February, will we have some figures attached to some of the suggestions that you have put in this plan? Is that the plan?
We do have figures for the crossing lights. There's some design aspects around the parklets. They could be varied depending on what you decide to put in them. But the idea behind this plan is to encourage them. So we have certain areas that are mapped out right now strategically so that it would slow down but also create a visual to see pedestrians crossing, make sure those lights aren't impeded that we have there, and the stop sign, for example. Those things are all in there, and they do, the stop sign and the cross lights do have costs, as well as paving the trail, and the other costs are in operational around the paint for the bike lanes and things like that, and I've already spoken to the engineer on that. So we'll try to work out a specific detail on the cost around that. But it's all, that part of it's in operation, but the capital is around the, and we do have the quotes for the cross lights and the stop signs.
Thank you. And the reason I say that is because we're coming on a budget very soon, and usually what we do is we take a look at everything that we want to do, and we prioritize what we want to do this year, what we want to do next year, so on and so forth. We don't usually do everything in the same year because that will cost a lot, but it'll be nice to do something and then have a plan for the rest to be done in upcoming years. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, we did have it phased in there, so we did take the budget consideration in there as well. So, for example, looking at the primary routes and phasing in just bike lanes for 1 year, and then maybe 2 to 5 years down the road looking at rumble strips. So just kind of phasing them in. But we did recommend the priorities being around those safety concerns at the A&W crosswalk, the post office, and Jubilee.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, the post office has always been a contentious point of mine for the last 2 years. I'm kind of hoping to get a traffic light there. We had one lady killed a number of years ago, and thank you very much. Is there anybody else that has a comment or a question? Sorry, Susan, I knocked you off there.
Just one comment about the parklets. I think it's a good idea, except I'm wondering about the distraction factor. You know, you're driving down the street and you're saying, oh, look at that, look at the pretty flowers there, or look at this, or look at that. That's the only thing I have on that.
Take that in consideration during the designing process.
I just wanted to say thanks staff for preparing the report, and I do agree with the chair that the crosswalk in front of the post office should probably be signed. I never thought of the one with A&W, but that's probably a good location as well, and I look forward to delving this into more detail and going from there. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 6, and we correspondence. Susan, you're going to read out our correspondence, please?
This is a piece of correspondence from the Pictou County Roots for Youth Society. It's regarding their Coldest Night of the Year sponsorship, and council has allotted $500 in their annual grant budget for this.
Well, we have a lot of 500. Good, thank you.
Need a motion now, or is it okay?
I would like a motion.
I'll move that.
Recommendation, sorry.
I'd move that we recommend that we sponsor this for $500.
Thank you, Councillor Pence. Motion for recommendation by the mayor and second by Councillor Wong. Sorry, is the question? All in favor? Contrary-minded?
The next piece of correspondence, Deputy Mayor, is from Kellyanne Dean. She's the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs. This is in response to the Mayor of Town of Shelburne, Karen Matadal, regarding the Central Dispatch Fire Department. She thanked them for sharing their position, and she recommended that if they would like to discuss it further, to contact Fred Jeffers, who's the fire marshal.
Thank you. We've already spoken that.
The next piece of correspondence is from the Pictou County Fuel Fund. Again, this is a letter, an annual letter that has been approved for $500 in the annual grants.
So it's been approved. Can we have a motion to recommend that?
So moved. I'd recommend that we recommend to council for $500 to the Pictou County Fuel Fund for this year.
Motion was by Mayor McGilvery and seconded by Councillor Pence. All in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary-minded? Motion carried.
The next piece of correspondence is from the Mariposa East Skating Center. They're asking for sponsorship opportunity with regards to their Elvis Stoico Ice Show on March 10th, taking place at the Pictou County Wellness Center. There has been $50 allotted in the annual grants from a request that was made last year.
So it's been allotted. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Pence, second by Councillor Lewan. Recommended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary-minded? Motion carried.
And the last piece of correspondence is from Nova Scotia Environment Minister Margaret Miller regarding, this was sent to all municipalities in Nova Scotia, and it's regarding the amended definition of waste diversion in the regulations to include energy recovery.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7.
One moment, Mr. Chair. What exactly does that mean, Susan? Waste? Is that for fuel?
What I got out of it and reading it, they're just changing the name of it, and I think they're including, if I'm not mistaken, the reclamation of fuels and liquids.
I think it's to do with burning other things for energy that weren't allowed to be burned for energy before, such as tires and things like that.
And all construction waste.
Probably. Yeah.
Is there any other questions on? I'm sorry. No. Moving on to item 7. Our first one is draft policy for scent-free. Is there any question on that policy?
For information, this was brought up at the Occupational Health and Safety table, asking the council to develop a scent-free policy to go coincide with the Occupational Health and Safety policy manual.
I just know when, a number of years ago, when we were doing the first aid down at the riverfront, it scared me to think that there was a gentleman that, a lady, he was in the stands and a lady walked by with perfume on and actually we had to give him oxygen to bring him around. So I can understand most public buildings now are gold scent-free. So we need a motion on that, a motion for recommendation.
On the question, Mr. Chair, I don't like the word encouraged. It's either they do or they don't.
Fair point. The issue is we cannot make an employee do something. We have a policy that would address it, but at the end of the day, that's not something they could be disciplined for if they choose to wear deodorant because of body odor or any other health. So that's why the word encouraged is there.
And they could have a medical condition of some sort. I can understand where you're coming from on this one, Susan.
And in the 1.3, it says supervisors are expected to assist in resolving any issue rising out of sense in the workplace. And I think that would be an opportunity for the employee and the supervisor to maybe work out some sort of solution.
I see both sides of the argument, but I'm just going to take in peanuts, for example. In the schools, kids are forbidden from taking peanuts or eating peanuts, and for the simple reason it's infringing on somebody else's health. It could be a danger to somebody else's health. So there's that. Councillor Campbell, you worked at the hospital. You were there when they brought the scent-free in. Do you have any input on that? Not really. Push your button. Push your button.
Most people will use common sense. I think most people don't slather it on like they used to. That being said, years ago I was at the VG, I think, and I'd forgotten that was back in the day when a woman wore perfume. Don't wear it anymore, but I had perfume on, and I was embarrassed because I had perfume on, and it was the scent-free area. So I think people are more cautious today than they used to be.
I'd like to go ahead and recommend the policy as written.
I would like to note that it is currently not an issue.
Mr. Chair, I have another question as well. The policy says that the town of Stellarton wishes to provide a scent-free environment for all employees and visitors to the town hall. So it's expectation that people coming into the door will try and be respectful of that fact. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I read that as well and was concerned, but I think the way around that is with signage, and like Councillor Campbell said, if somebody gets in the building, after a while they're going to, it'd be mentioned to them in a nice way, and most people are going to refrain. You're right. How are you going to enforce it with? That's why I guess it's ambiguous, and we're saying cooperate.
You're right there, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Signage would be the solution. I know at the YMCA, it's for the last probably 15 or 20 years, it's been scent-free, and the signs all over the building say no sense makes sense. So it's an education piece. You're right. I'll second Councillor Pence's motion.
Councillor Pence made a motion on a motion to recommend to council on a scent-free policy, seconded by Mayor McGilvery. All in favor? Aye. Councillor Minded? Motion carried. C, Joint Occupational Health and Safety Policy. I'm sorry, I jumped. Where'd I get off track? Okay, I'm sorry. Snow removal policy. I guess, Blaine, you're on here. Explain yourself.
Yeah, so in front of you, you have a draft policy regarding the procedure for snow removal along the curbs on Ford Street as requested. You guys requested that. Basically, it states that snowstorms and with greater than 15 centimeters of snowfall, we would remove snow off along the curb or accumulated smaller storms up to 15 centimeters of snowfall. Yeah.
No, I know we got to use a bit of common sense there, and we got to leave it up to your judgment. I mean, we can't micromanage that situation. And my only concern is that we get it, it doesn't stay there for 2 months or 2 weeks or whatever, because if it does, when it rains, it freezes, and we had that situation where cars can't get up to the curb, and we're narrowing the street of the traffic. So that's my only concern. That if it's cleaned up in a prudent time, I'm okay with it.
I think, Mr. Chair, that he put 72 hours in there, and that seems to be a reasonable time after a storm.
Thank you. Is there anybody who would like?
I'd make a recommendation that we adopt as written the proposal put forward by our town engineer.
I'll second it to get it on the floor. Blaine, do you think this is a reasonable, within budget policy that we could adopt? Do you think it'll throw us way over budget? Or do you think it's something reasonable and doable?
From my experience, there's 4 years being on as a town engineer. Haven't seen a lot of snowstorms. We had to do this all the time. Usually, I don't know, last year we might have did it 3 or 4 times maybe. It's around $2,000, $2,500 a pop. So I guess you kind of got to see where it falls out at the end of the year.
So I'll echo what the deputy mayor said. I think it's also, we have a lot of your judgment to be used in this as well to keep us within budget. And so that's my concern, is if we do this too often, we'll be over budget. But if you think we can stay with this policy, I'm okay with it.
Danny, I've been on council for 16 years prior to coming on, and I'm going to tell you, when it comes to snow removal and budgets, well, my friend, a budget is a measuring stick, especially if we had a winter like 2014. Now, you have people on the main street that are paying commercial taxes for a service. Our main street is uniquely different than other main streets in Pictou County. We have our 2 banks on the main street. We have our post office on the main street. We have our coffee shops on the main street. And I think, as a councillor, we should look after our main street.
The other thing that you also need to think of is it's either in or out. We can't do a policy and then say after that, well, use your judgment. If you're over budget, don't do it. The policy is there. So again, we're either in or we're out.
Thank you, Councillor Wan and Councillor Pence. I agree that my biggest concern, and I know and I understand where the mayor is coming from in budgets, but I remember back when we first got on council, when we first elected, the first snowstorm, I got phone calls from residents, and if we're going to displease anybody, it's going to be over snow plowing. So it's a concern of mine that the street is plowed. Like I said, I don't expect you to do it after every snowstorm, but I expect within a reasonable length of time to have it clear, because I don't want snow to build up and people to be crippling trying to get over the snowbanks. You made a recommendation, and Mayor McGilvery seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried. Passed down to council. Thank you. Now I can move on to joint occupational health and safety policy update.
That would be me. So I'm one of the co-chairs for the committee, and each year we have to bring it to council if there was any recommendations to council about any amendments to the policy. There's just two small grammatical changes that were done this year, so we're recommending that council sign off. There was one change to a form that we have for incident reports, and that was it. That's the recommendation.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
We have a grammatical change on the policy referring to the company rules, and then we have a form change on the inspections. Yep.
Can we have a motion on that to recommend?
Should we see what the changes are before we approve them? No, I don't see anything in the package.
Who has the changes? Would you rather read over the changes and then bring it to council? We'll put it off the next council? Okay, we'll get that to council, please, Paul, and then we'll take it up in a council meeting. Thank you. Open forum. Is there anybody who would like to speak in the open forum? Number 9, next meeting is February the 25th, 2019 at 5:30. Can somebody make a motion to adjourn?
So move.